Lloyd Carr with the national title. Jim Tressel with the national title. And both of them trying to get back again to the championship game. The winner, no doubt, will go to Glendale, Arizona to play for it as the Wolverines come out on the field. And, you know, when you look across...
The only real debate on November 18th, 2006 wasn't about whether number 1 Ohio State versus number 2 Michigan was the biggest game of the college football season or the biggest game in the century-long rivalry between the Buckeyes and Wolverines. It was over whether it was the biggest regular season game in college football history. And that was before Bo Schembechler died.
Bo made the game of football better in every way. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family and everyone who mourns his passing.
2 days before the game, the legendary Michigan coach gave his traditional pep talk to the Wolverines after their final practice of Ohio State week. He collapsed and died the next morning at age 77. The passing of this Big Ten legend now lending an air of melancholy to a showdown of Northern superiority. Bo was a Northern king. Schembechler had led the Wolverines for 21 seasons and went head-to-head with Ohio State coach Woody Hayes over a decade so intense they called their showdown the 10-year war. But even he had never coached in a game like this. He said so the week of his death. "This is about as big as it gets," said Bo. "I don't know what else you can do. Two teams that have been dominant all year long, and let's face it, there's no rivalry that compares to this." This is the 25-year winter, how championship college football went dormant in the North. This 5-part podcast series will dive into the failings of Northern college football and the dominance of Southern college football in the modern era. I'm Doug Lesmerises.
I'm Bill Landis, and we're the co-hosts of the Kings of the North College Football Show. This is episode 1, an introduction to Northern ball and an examination of how the North's place in the sport looked so strong and how it fell apart so quickly.
You could feel the tug-of-war between the past and the future in this game. It was 19 years after the death of Hayes, and it's 19 years from where we are now. Of course, Michigan-Ohio State was historic, but it didn't feel old. The past mattered, but this game didn't feel trapped in its history. The Bowl Championship Series, intended to match the two best teams in the national title game, had started in 1998 and really got fans thinking about rankings year-round. This was just the second 1-2 regular season matchup since then. The first was Ohio State's win over Texas in September. By the way, there wouldn't be another regular season 1-2 battle for 5 more years until Alabama-LSU. 8 times previously, Ohio State-Michigan had featured the number 1 team in the country, but never had the opponent been number 2. And all of this was happening within the rivalry that ESPN had recently reaffirmed as the best in American sports, ahead of the Yankees and Red Sox. These were 2 of the 5 winningest programs in college football history, who had defined each other through a century of rugged hate, simultaneously at their best, and firmly planted at the forefront of a resurgence of Northern football. The Buckeyes and Wolverines weren't outliers, but rather leaders in this region. In the BCS standings this late November week, 4 other Northern schools joined Ohio State and Michigan in the top 9. Notre Dame, Rutgers, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. The North was more than holding its own, as expected, with players from their backyard unsurprisingly leading the way. 86% of the starters in this 1-2 game were from the North. Rust Belt football providing young men sturdy enough to serve as the building blocks of these championship contenders. And 31 of the 44 starters were from Ohio and Michigan for this 48-degree kickoff.
Sturdy Rust Belt football players makes me feel like this game was played a million years ago.
Yeah, thanks for aging me.
So much has changed in 19 years. This version of college football doesn't seem real. Have we ever had a 1 versus 2 North matchup since this game?
Yeah, one. The Michigan-Washington national title game to end the 2023 season. 17 years later. But nothing in the regular season. But 1-2 Michigan-Ohio State really did happen. I covered this game. Watched the Wolverines exit their buses outside Ohio Stadium on Friday while mourning Bo. attended the Friday night concert of a kitsch ska band named the Dead Schembechlers, who changed their name to the Bastard Sons of Woody for that performance. If you couldn't tell, the Dead Schembechlers were an Ohio-based band of Buckeye loyalists who delighted in melodically taunting Michigan.
I hate Michigan! I hate Michigan! I hate Michigan! The Wolverine! I hate Michigan! I hate Michigan! I hate Michigan! The Wolverine!
I watched the Buckeyes outlast the Wolverines 42-39 in a game featuring 900 yards of total offense and 15 players who'd be selected in the next NFL draft. And I can tell you what no one was thinking about, or especially worrying about, was Southern college football. The SEC was an afterthought. The whole world was an afterthought because the center of the college football universe was the cold, gritty, and dominant Midwest, at least for another 51 days. But what in the moment seemed like an affirmation was instead a last gasp. This was a Northern football peak that wouldn't be reclaimed for more than 15 years. We didn't know it then, but the sport was moving south, and that flow was about to accelerate into rapids that the North would too often fail to navigate. In this 5-part series, we will investigate how and why the North fell short, and how college football dominance by the South became an accepted part of an increasingly national sport. Those encroaching realities couldn't have felt further away as kickoff approached in Columbus in 2006. The anticipation for the game was accompanied by real discussion over whether Ohio State and Michigan, 2 Big Ten teams, should rematch in the BCS National Championship outside Phoenix on January 8th. I think it was a great game. I think it was a close game. I think anybody could have won that game, Michigan star running back Mike Hart said after his team's loss. Do I think there should be a rematch? Probably. I think we're both the top teams in the country, regardless of what anybody says. These Northern teams were that good, and the rest of the sport was that uncertain. That became more true after USC, the new number 2 team after Michigan's loss, fell to UCLA 2 weeks later. Back then, the Big Ten regular season ended before Thanksgiving while other conferences played on. Not everyone agreed on the rankings that November, but everyone agreed on this game. This is a Super Bowl game. It really is, college football broadcaster Paul McGuire told me in the days before the matchup. This goes beyond all championships and all other things. If you don't watch it, there's really got to be something wrong with you. I can't imagine that anyone who likes the game of football would think about missing this game. No one did miss it. Kickoff was moved from the traditional noon window to 3:30 to accommodate the expected television audience. Good call. The 12.9 rating made it the most robust regular season viewership of a college football game in 13 years. Auburn, Alabama kicked off in the Iron Bowl at the same time and drew a 1.9 rating. Yeah, the Big Ten won that eyeball battle nearly 7 times over. The SEC championship 2 weeks later between Arkansas and Florida, with the victorious Gators earning that title game spot opposite the Buckeyes, got a 4.5 rating, about 1/3 of the OSU audience. Nationally, there was no debate. After Ohio State's victory, Sports Illustrated's cover featured a photo of quarterback Troy Smith with the headline of "The Best," period. Smith went on to win the Heisman Trophy in the second largest landslide ever. He beat Arkansas running back Darren McFadden, but finishers 3, 4, and 5 were Northern players from Notre Dame, West Virginia, and Michigan. Listen, it's not like the North ruled the sport, but no conference or region or way of life had yet asserted monolithic dominance in college football. The South played good ball. The North did too. It could still mean a lot to everyone. But a modern nationalization of what had for decades been a regional sport was underway. Previously, fiefdoms rose up under the power of a head coach who was both local savior and national icon. Teams around the nation succeeded at the highest level, from Hayes and Schembechler at Ohio State and Michigan to Bear Bryant at Alabama to Joe Paterno at Penn State to Darrell Royal at Texas to Don James at Washington to Bobby Bowden at Florida State to Lavelle Edwards at BYU. College football lords reigned. Who was better? Did anyone really know? Did anyone really care? When Alabama and Ohio State met in a Bear Woody showdown on January 2nd, 1978, it was Ohio State's first game against the SEC since 1935. It was Bama's first game against the Big Ten since 1928. Man, imagine how big that Sugar Bowl was. You won in your backyard. You didn't travel to other neighborhoods to measure yourself. By 2006, that era was gone. Ohio State-Michigan was huge in part because no game in the rivalry's history had featured both teams ranked at the top of the sport. It was also huge because the winner would advance as the Kings of the North, with the opportunity to stake a claim on behalf of this region and this brand of football. But the North didn't understand what was waiting for it. Ohio State was the preseason number 1 team with 2 wins over number 2 teams on its resume. And the Buckeyes' title game appearance in the Fiesta Bowl on January 8th was mostly an expected coronation for a 7-point favorite. Ohio State was just 4 years removed from a national title, the 7th claimed in program history. Florida had won its first national title 10 years earlier, but was looking now to second-year coach Urban Meyer to save the Gators from a half-decade of mediocrity. Meyer admitted later to fabricating unflattering quotes and posting them around his football building to fire up the underdogs. Florida needed an edge because Ohio State had the better team. The Gators had a midseason loss to Auburn. The Buckeyes were on a 19-game winning streak dating back to October 2005. That resume check, we'll discover later, maybe had something to do with SEC depth, while the low-end Big Ten programs were library-focused. In the moment, all but one of the 241 voters in the 3 major polls had the Buckeyes first on their ballots. Florida had backed into the game only because of USC's upset loss. Sure, the North had been dinged a bit in the postseason. Michigan lost the Rose Bowl to USC by 2 scores, and LSU stomped Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl 41-14. But Penn State and Wisconsin beat ranked SEC teams on New Year's Day. So when Ohio State's Ted Ginn Jr. returned the opening kickoff in Glendale, Arizona for a touchdown, the Buckeyes looked ready to claim their throne. And then Florida swiped it with speed. Unbelievably, Ginn was injured by a teammate in the touchdown celebration. How appropriate is the final death knell for Northern football arriving via overexuberance at its own success? The Big Ten is the obvious candidate to injure itself through backslapping. Without their fastest player, the Buckeyes look stuck in the mud against the Gators. The mantra of SEC speed rose up not only because of Gator receiver Percy Harvin, but because the Buckeyes seemingly couldn't block twitchy Florida defensive ends Derek Harvey and Jarvis Moss, who combined for 5 sacks. There's open field speed, and then there's the acceleration of a 250-pound strongman capable of disrupting every single play for your offense. The speed was everywhere. Florida didn't just beat the Buckeyes, they overwhelmed them. Heisman winner Smith finished 4 of 14 passing for 35 yards, looking so sluggish that jokes developed over whether he had eaten too many In-N-Out burgers in Arizona. 41-14, the same score as the LSU win over Notre Dame, was imprinted on the Buckeyes. They used it as their door code at football headquarters for the ensuing offseason. But the bigger picture was imprinted on the eyes, minds, and hearts of college football fans around the country. SEC speed and aggression had stormed the beaches of the Big Ten. Not only did the North not win this title, it would win just one of the next 17 college football championships. Overnight, the sport had flipped. Fueled first by Meyer, an Ohio native raised as a fan of the Buckeyes. He'd win a second title in 2008 with an LSU title led by Ohio native and Michigan man Les Miles squeezed in between. And then Alabama's Nick Saban, another son of the North, would claim 6 titles in this era with the Crimson Tide. Raised the son of a West Virginia gas station owner, trained as a player in the Rust Belt hamlet of Kent State, nurtured as a coach by the North for 2 decades. And he saved the SEC. We'll dig in more there later. Ugh. If you're counting, those next 8 national championships would go Florida, LSU, Florida, Alabama, then Auburn, then Bama, and Florida State. So back in the moment that November, it felt like Ohio State and Michigan were at the peak of college football. It turned out they were actually at the edge of a cliff. So, Bill, time to get out an audio map. I've been throwing around the terms North and South as it relates to college football. We need to tell the people what we mean.
How about we start with the teams? By our definition, and I guess somebody had to define it, we claim 28 current power conference teams when we talk about Northern college football. Would you like me to name all of them?
If you can remember them.
We'll see. Challenge accepted. Here's an easy one. First, we have Notre Dame as an independent. Nailed it. Then we have Pitt, Syracuse, and Boston College from the ACC.
That's 4.
We take 8 Northern teams from the Big 12. That's Cincinnati, West Virginia, Iowa State, Colorado, BYU, Utah, Kansas, and Kansas State.
That's 12.
And then it's everyone in the Big 10 except for UCLA and USC. Too much sun and sand in Southern California. They're not North. So that means Oregon, Washington, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Northwestern, Purdue, Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Rutgers, and Maryland.
All 28. Congrats.
Whew. Thank you. We count 6 power conference teams as what we would call border schools. The 4 in California, USC, UCLA, Stanford, and Cal, plus Louisville and Virginia Tech.
So that leaves 34 power conference Southern schools. Let me see if I can get these. Okay. Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, Mississippi State.
Oh, I think there's an easier way to do this. How about this? If your head coach owns a snow shovel, you're in the North. We check the weather records, and by we, I mean you. 42 degrees is your average December temperature probably means you're in the North.
But it's not just meteorology. It's also latitude. The Mason-Dixon line was 39.43 degrees latitude. Our line is 38.95 degrees latitude. That gets us Kansas above that line and Missouri below it.
So it's snow and latitude. Is that the extent of our definition?
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
What about vibes?
Ah, yes. Also the vibes.
We think there's a culture and community with Northern college football the same way there is with the South. The South defines it better and leans into it more. Say Southern college football and most people conjure up a mental picture. But we also think the North can and should. Think a chill in the air, wearing a hoodie to a game.
So snow, latitude, vibes, and hoodies. That it?
And also not winning national titles for a quarter century.
There was Clemson, and there was LSU, and another Bama, and Georgia.
So how does a sport come to be defined by one region's superiority? It's quite simple, really. The South has done almost all of the winning since the turn of the millennium. For some of us who are well into adulthood, that's still practically our entire lifetime. From the advent of the Bowl Championship Series in 1998 through the 2022 College Football Playoff, a 25-year period during which the sport twice redefined how it crowned its champion, The title was won by a team from the North exactly twice. Ohio State upset Miami in the BCS National Championship to cap the 2002 season. Then the Buckeyes did it again in 2014, first slaying mighty Alabama and then besting Oregon to claim the first title of the playoff era. That's it. 25 years, 2 titles for the North. 2 for USC, including a shared title with LSU in 2003. The rest went to the South. You probably associate that period specifically with SEC dominance. Mini dynasties from Meyer's Florida program and Kirby Smart's Georgia bookended Saban's 6 titles at Alabama. The SEC won the national championship 15 times in those 25 years, including 7 straight from 2006 to 2012. For many, North and South alike, the SEC was college football. It was inevitable. And to an extent, that was true. But the South's quarter-century-long grip on the sport's ultimate prize stretched beyond the purview of the Southeastern Conference's Birmingham, Alabama headquarters. Miami won in 2001 and was poised to rule the sport beyond that one title until its repeat bid was thwarted by Ohio State. Both ends of the Red River rivalry, Oklahoma and Texas, nabbed titles in 2000 and 2005, respectively. Florida State won 2, first in 1999 and then again in 2013. Another mini dynasty materialized seemingly overnight on the grounds of a former plantation in the South Carolina foothills when Dabo Swinney's Clemson won CFP titles in 2016 and 2018. I know what you're thinking. Hasn't it always been this way? I'm glad you asked. These 25 years of Southern dominance in college football are so noteworthy because of the 25 years that preceded it, which is to say that no, it hasn't always been this way. This imbalance of power was different. This consolidation of national championships in one part of the country, stretching almost 3 decades, wasn't ordinary. The South won, sure, but so did the North. And that's the larger point. It's not that the North had its power wrested away by the South. It's that the national championship was geographically impartial. In the 25 years from 1973 to 1997, the South had 15 titles from 8 different schools. Meanwhile, the North had 13 titles from 8 different schools. You remember, for much of this period, shared championships were common. In fact, it did happen 6 times. Over that 25-year span from 73 to 97, Notre Dame and Nebraska were national champs 3 times, and Penn State won twice. Meanwhile, Pitt, Colorado, Washington, Michigan, and BYU all claimed legitimate national titles.
I guess the most important thing, BYU is number 1.
That's for sure. That's what we're thinking, and I don't think there's no one else in the country that can be number 1.
All right, Robbie Bosco, quarterback of BYU, the game's MVP, passed for about 350 yards, about 30 completions, and the Cougars win it. Howard, Paul?
Then the North's ability to rise up and win it all just stopped. Only Ohio State could break through for a couple, hardly enough to stem the rising tide in the South. Meanwhile, 11 Southern programs won titles between 1998 and 2022, including teams like Auburn winning its first title since 1957, Tennessee's first since 1967, and Texas's first since 1970. The South didn't just have dynasties. It had pop-up champions filling in when the dynasties needed a breather. Seriously, Auburn? We get an Auburn and a Tennessee, but Penn State or Notre Dame can't mix in. As the South's momentum sustained, teams across Northern football fumbled opportunity after opportunity. And boy, there were some near misses in there that really could have upended this whole Southern dominance narrative.
This is not going to be pretty.
It's not, but it's necessary. This podcast might not exist if a few of these things have gone the other way, but we need to revisit them. So let's check out what could have been. Here comes your history lesson in Northern Heartbreak. The North had its chances during the BCS era. 16 championships were awarded under that system, and the North appeared in 6 of those title games. Problem is, the North went 1-5, and almost all of those losses were pretty ugly. Ohio State beat Miami in 2002, as we've mentioned, denying the Hurricanes a chance for a repeat. The other 5 North vs. South BCS title games all went the South's way, usually emphatically. Miami beat Nebraska 37-14 in 2001. Florida hammered Ohio State 41-14 in 2006. The Buckeyes kept it closer the following year, but still lost to LSU 38-24. Auburn over Oregon in 2010 was an outlier, a 22-19 squeaker of a win that was punctuated by a chip shot field goal as time expired, so at least that one was close. Then there was 2012. Alabama 42, Notre Dame 14. A bloodletting that gave Saban 3 titles in 4 years and put an exclamation mark on the SEC's run of 7 consecutive national championships, with an emphatic reminder of Southern football's superiority to its northern counterparts.
To the strains of Sweet Home Alabama, the tide rolls, and not only have they won 3 and 4, but how about the state of Alabama? In between, Auburn captured 1. And now, the dominance of the SEC. There you can see Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow capturing a couple. Les Miles at LSU. And now dominance by Alabama, 3 of 4. And Cam Newton with that championship in 2010. So there's the center.
It wasn't enough that the North always seemed to bungle its opportunities on the biggest stage. There were other missteps throughout the BCS era. Ways in which other Northern teams squandered chances to put themselves in a position to play for the title. Kansas State knows all about that heartbreak. Bill Snyder's Wildcats twice got within spitting distance of playing for a national championship during the BCS era. In 1998, K-State was number 3 in the country, 11-0, but behind fellow unbeatens Tennessee and UCLA in early December. Then a stroke of good fortune. UCLA lost to Miami right as Snyder's team was taking a 17-3 lead on Texas A&M in the Big 12 title game. By the way, UCLA and Miami were only playing on this same day because a hurricane had moved their game from September to December. K-State led 27-12 heading into the fourth quarter, 15 minutes from punching its ticket to the first BCS national championship. They were celebrating it in the stands. But a fumble from Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback Michael Bishop sparked an Aggie comeback. Texas A&M rallied and won 36-33 in double overtime. Here's how legendary K-State head coach Bill Snyder summed it up after the game. Quote, "It's painful now, and it will become more painful later. And it will be even more painful in the middle of the night. And tomorrow, it will be the most painful of all." The guy was really going through it. He had no idea what was coming in 2012, when Kansas State won its first 10 games, rose as high as number 2 in the country, and then lost to an unranked Baylor team in Waco. That loss was as shocking as it was lopsided. Baylor had lost 5 of 6 games and then beat Kansas State 52-24. Other blunders for the North during the BCS era. Ohio State would have been in the title picture in 1998 if not for an upset loss to Michigan State in early November when the Buckeyes were the number 1 team in the country. That was then Michigan State head coach Nick Saban eliminating a potential Northern champion, by the way. Nebraska, as we mentioned, lost to Miami in the title game to cap the 2001 season. Perhaps someone else could have fared better. Pac-12 champ Oregon had 1 loss. Big 12 champ Colorado had 2 losses, but also had a blowout win against Nebraska. But it was the Huskers who got the bid and lost 37-14 in the Rose Bowl. The North vs. North BCS title game was right there in 2006, but there wasn't quite an appetite for that Ohio State-Michigan rematch. Could you imagine? It was there in 2007. Number 2 Kansas, yes Kansas, lost to number 3 Missouri on November 24th, ending the Jayhawks' chase of an unfathomable football national championship. West Virginia benefited from the loss and elevated to number 2, a BCS berth squarely in the sights of that Mountaineer musket. Then disaster. West Virginia lost to unranked 4-7 Pitt by a score of 13-9 in a haunting backyard brawl. Oregon had its chances. It lost the title game to Auburn in 2010 and then got upset as the number 1 team in the country by Stanford after starting the season 10-0 in 2012. That's a lot of Northern BCS disappointment and missed chances. Surely the advent of the college football playoff was kinder to the North, what with its inclusivity and more forgiving playoff structure, right? Well, you could argue it was worse. For the North, the idea of playing for a championship felt more attainable, and yet actually winning it proved to be just as difficult as it was during the BCS era. Ohio State did win the inaugural playoff, backdooring its way into the field with a dominant showing in the Big Ten championship, and then upsetting Saban's Alabama in the semifinals. The Buckeyes blasted Oregon in the national title game, but then missed out on a chance to repeat as champions thanks to a shocking loss to Michigan State in November of that following year. By the way, Michigan State was playing that game with its backup quarterback. That was the Buckeyes' only loss, but they watched from home as the Spartans went to the playoff and then were shut out by eventual champion Alabama in the semifinals. That kicked off a string of some uncompetitive losses for the North on the playoff stage. Michigan State lost to Alabama 38-0. Ohio State lost to Clemson 31-0 the following year. In that same playoff, Washington lost to Alabama 24-7. And then in 2018, Notre Dame lost to Clemson 30-3 in the semifinals. If you're keeping tabs, that was 4 straight Northern losses to Southern teams in playoff semifinals by a combined score of 123-10. See, while the North struggled to routinely find its way into the championship picture during the BCS era, it was almost always going to have a shot in the 4-team playoff. In the 10 years of the 4-team format, the North was left out of the field only once, when an all-South playoff in 2017 featured Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Alabama. In fact, the North had 2 teams in the field in 5 out of 9 playoffs from 2014 to 2022. Still, it could only muster the 1 title in 2014, and it routinely got run off the field. In 2020, Alabama beat Notre Dame 31-14 in one semifinal. Ohio State beat Clemson in the other, but then it lost to Alabama in the championship 52-24. Cincinnati, 27-6 losers to Alabama, and Michigan, 34-11 losers to Georgia, were non-competitive in 2021 semifinal games. We were rightfully considering the reality of an Ohio State-Michigan national championship in 2022. Instead, the Wolverines were upset by TCU in one semifinal, and Ohio State missed a potential game-winning field goal late in the other semifinal against Georgia. The kick fluttering well left of the uprights on New Year's Eve, right as 2022 turned into 2023.
From 50 for the win and a spot in the national championship game. It's on the way. No good. He hooked it. And Georgia is going to survive.
Georgia went on to throttle TCU in the national championship. This time, nearly getting an Ohio State versus Michigan championship game was a sign that a shift was on the horizon. The truth in the moment, however, was that the SEC was again on top of the sport, and that the South had won its 22nd title in 25 years. Put differently, the South owned college football, and there was no getting around that fact. We don't always talk about college football in these terms. Nobody has quite defined this period of the sport as a battle between the northern half and the southern half of the country. But that's what it was, and the North was faltering. Consider if there were similar splits in other sports. What would people think of Major League Baseball if the American League managed to win only 2 World Series in 25 years? How about the National Football League if the NFC lost 23 of 25 Super Bowls? That's where college football was. And there was little reason to believe it would change.
That's a lot of championship what-ifs, my friend. But you can't escape the reality of what those close calls and blown opportunities created.
Like a perception shift? South good, North bad?
But do you think there was one that mattered the most in that?
For sure. The 2012 title game when Alabama blew out Notre Dame. The speed and strength gap was huge, and a final big stage affirmation that the North couldn't hang. Urban Meyer had gone 12-0 at Ohio State in his first season, but the Buckeyes were banned from the postseason, so he watched that championship game as a broadcaster and then targeted Alabama as the level that the Buckeyes needed to get to.
And I'm sitting there and I'm getting so pissed off as I'm watching Alabama, and I'm thinking, we're not even close to that. Our coaching's not close to that. Our talent level is not close to that. And I texted every player and every coach for the next 2.5 hours during the game. And I called it the chase. We are now, that season's over. We just went 12-0 in a very average conference. This is not our goal. Our goal is to chase that team right there.
But the thing was, Alabama never should have been there.
So you have the national standard for coaching and recruiting that Saban established in Tuscaloosa, but you also have a backdoor title that shouldn't have been?
Exactly. Urban Meyer should have been watching Kansas State versus Oregon.
Kansas State versus Oregon?
Oregon versus Kansas State.
Not Alabama, Notre Dame.
Nope. Wildcats and Ducks, no doubt. In week 9 of the BCS standings, undefeated Alabama was number 1, followed by Kansas State, Oregon, and Notre Dame. Then Johnny Manziel happened.
Oh, baby. I am making the money gesture right now. Do I look cool?
No, but he did that day. He led a 29-24 win over the Crimson Tide, and the next week Alabama was number 4. Kansas State, Oregon, and Notre Dame were all 10-0 and ranked ahead of them. And then
Johnny Manziel beat them all too?
No, it was Stanford quarterback Kevin Hogan who beat Oregon.
Oh, and Jim Harbaugh. He was the coach. Legend.
No, it was David Shaw.
Okay, so Kevin Hogan and David Shaw ruined Oregon, and
quarterback Nick Florence, running back Leish Seastrunk, and head coach Art Briles ruined Kansas State.
I'm making the head in my hands gesture now.
Welcome back to the top 2 of the BCS, Nick Saban.
And hello, extra title. Notre Dame had some good wins that year. Michigan, Oklahoma, Stanford in overtime. But if Alabama could throttle the Irish, I think maybe Oregon or Kansas State could have done the same.
So take away that Saban title and maybe the one in 2017 when they slipped in as the 4 seed and won it all.
And maybe the 2011 title when Alabama lost to LSU in the regular season and got the regular season rematch in the title game that Michigan did not get in 2006.
So then what do you have? 3 titles for Saban instead of 6?
And instead of frowning, demanding, diabolical recruiting and coaching super genius Nick Saban, you have
frowning, demanding, diabolical recruiting and coaching regular genius Nick Saban.
3 Alabama national championships is still a lot, but it's half as many as 6.
And 1 national championship for Oregon or Kansas State would be infinity times the number they actually have, which is 0.
So we're saying the North blew it, and Saban is lucky, and he actually kind of stinks.
No, we're saying Saban was the best, and the South did have a talent and coaching edge. But through grit, northern failure, and maybe a little luck, they maximized that edge for 25 years. And the North let the South do it. From coaching to players, from resources to attitudes, for most of our 25 years, Northern college football failed at the highest levels.
Yeah, the SEC built a monster, but the Big Ten didn't even fight back. In the face of a 10-foot beast from the South, the North capitulated, ceded ground, and acted like this monster touched the sky.
Every Southern advantage was met by a Northern excuse. Every SEC taunt was met by a Big Ten shrug.
So the football advantages were real, but the perception was even greater than the reality. There's a college football book from 2014 called My Conference Can Beat Your Conference. On the cover is a shouting man in a suit holding a banner announcing that conference claim. It's a boast and a challenge. I wonder what conference that could be about. The subhead is Why the SEC Still Rules College Football, and the author and boaster is Paul Feinbaum. Now imagine someone, anyone, writing a book in the last 25 years with the same braggadocio about the Big Ten. The SEC is indestructible. The SEC is virtually unbeatable. It can bench press the Big Ten Conference with Vanderbilt tied behind its back, Feinbaum writes on page 1. Now on the SEC network and part of the ESPN family, Feinbaum launched his radio show across the South in 2001. That would have been more difficult to do without great Southern football. It would have been impossible to do without the great Southern passion and pride that both grew out of that success and propelled it. A 2014 New York Times survey checked on how many people in each state liked a college football team. 13 states were above 20% college football fandom. 8 in the South, 5 in the North. The SEC didn't officially unveil its "It Just Means More" conference slogan until 2016, but throughout this era of growing Southern dominance, you didn't have to slap a slogan on it to understand it. Southern football was excellent, but the hype was even better than the ball. And as Feinbaum's title told everyone, the South wasn't going to be quiet as they won. Win big, boast bigger. Let's slap some more numbers on you. So the North won just 2 of 25 national titles between 1998 and 2022, this time frame that we keep referencing. In that same period, in bowl game showdowns between major conference teams in the North and South, the South held an 84-78 edge. That's a 55% win percentage for the South, which is maybe not as bad as you would have guessed. But in BCS and New Year's 6 showdowns between the best teams on the biggest stages, the South edge in head-to-head postseason games with the North was 34-18, a win percentage of 65%. That's more worth bragging about. Yet, while the South was scooping up titles in overall top 10 finishes in the final Associated Press polls during these 25 years, the South took up 50.8% of the spots, the North 39.6%, and the border schools 9.6%. Again, a big edge, but that's basically like 5 spots in the top 10 per year for the South, 4 for the North, and 1 for someone else. Not exactly book cover material. But ooh, the Heisman Trophy winners. The Heisman is the greatest award in North American sports, an enigmatic mix of individual excellence, team success, and great stories. You know a Heisman winner when you see him. And during this period, he was from the South. South, 16 Heisman winners, border schools 5, the North just 4. Only 4. Compare that to the previous 25 years when the Heisman breakdown was 12 North, 11 South, and 2 border. The South took over. But in top 10 Heisman finishes in these last 25 years, the breakdown was 121 South, 95 North, and 35 border. Again, in an average year, that was about 5 Southern players in the top 10, 4 Northern players, and 1 border player. The Heisman is an honor built partly on perception, not just talent. It's a vote, not a scoreboard. So that edge of an extra top 10 player per year for the South, was it because Southern players were actually better? Or because voters thought Southern players were better because the South kept winning national titles? Last point, one that the staunchest proponents of Southern football often point to. The NFL draft. Who knows talent better than the professional scouts and general managers whose jobs depend on picking the right players? 25 years of first-round picks. South, 447. North, 267. Border, 81. That's 56.2% for the South, 33.6% for the North, and 10.2% for border schools. Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
What did you say when I told you those numbers?
That's quite the discrepancy, but also maybe not as bad as I would have guessed.
And I said, I think that's the right reaction to fit our premise. The reality of Southern dominance is bad, but the perception is even worse. Now, draft pick numbers are talent output for college football. Recruiting rankings are talent input, and we'll get into those in another episode. Our point for now is that we can't imagine anyone listening to this and disagreeing that the North fell behind the South in college football after the advent of the BCS. We can't imagine some of you saying, I actually thought it was worse. Because by the time the 4-team college playoff started in 2014, everyone agreed the South was smothering the North. Now, that first playoff title was won by an Ohio State team that recruited and played like an SEC team, as led by a former national championship SEC coach. But for about the next decade, those Buckeyes were just the exception that proves the rule. Under the headline, "As Big Ten Declines, Homegrown Talent Flees," the New York Times checked in on the decline of Northern ball in October 2014. As luck would have it, the story focused on the recruitment of an Ohio linebacker named Jerome Baker, who announced he was going to Florida in July. He flipped his commitment to Ohio State 3 weeks after the story was published, and he wound up a 2-year starter in Columbus, an eventual third-round NFL draft pick. But the point stood. As you're getting accustomed to, we talk about college football in geographic terms because we think that makes more sense than conferences do, given the chaotic nature of realignment. But when most people talk north-south, their shorthand is Big Ten SEC. And the Big Ten was losing over and over again. Wrote the Times, "The Big Ten slide is a byproduct of an even more undeniable and much documented fact. The Southeastern Conference, which won 7 consecutive BCS championships, towers over college football like a colossus." The attributed causes were familiar refrains we'll investigate in greater detail. Coaching failures, weather, then Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delaney talking about education and doing things the right way while the SEC seemed hell-bent on football victories. The coup de grace delivered by the Times, even in a story about a northern kid who would eventually stay north, let you know what the college football world was thinking. Quote, "The SEC sold excellence. The Big Ten sold tradition." Why was that the case? What created the dichotomy? Whose fault was it? We'll tell you in the ensuing episodes. And by the way, you may have noticed that our 25-year reference point expired with the 2022 season. That's because Michigan won the national title in 2023 and Ohio State won it in 2024. The first time 2 different Northern teams claimed consecutive undisputed national titles since Pitt and Notre Dame in 1976 and 1977. The tide seems to be turning, and we have reasons for that too. But first, we have to figure out what went wrong with Northern college football.
The 25-Year Winter, How Championship College Football Went Dormant in the North, is written and researched by Doug Lesmerises and me, Bill Landis. Michael Hanahan is our producer and composer.
Ryan Nanny and Stephen Godfrey are our executive producers. To catch our daily college football show, search for Kings of the North College Football on YouTube.